Slimefoot and Squee enters the battlefield and brings a 1/1 sapperling creature token with it that can then be sacrificed later to return Slimefoot and Squee from the graveyard to the battlefield alongside another creature card. This was a request from our Patreon, so I'm going to cover it and two other 3-color commanders that I think are flying under the radar a little bit, and the cool ways that they can be built, because there are 3 ways to build most commander decks.
Strong!
It's just fun.
And mean! Let's look at a strong, fun, and mean build of 3-color sleeper commanders via requests from our Patreon.
Highest level of gratitude to our patrons who power the channel through Patreon. Check out the Patreon link in the description to learn about monthly giveaways, VIP Discord access, and even our official playmat.
Big shout out to the sponsors of the channel. Card Conduit, the best place to sell your cards online quickly and easily. TCG Player, the official online store of Jake and Joel or Magic, best place to buy your cards. Dragon Shield, the best way to protect your cards. And Moxfield, the best way to list your cards on the internet. For the strong build in this video, we're going to look at Slimefoot and Squee, a green, a red, and a black for a 3/3 fungus goblin that says, whenever Slimefoot and Squee enters the battlefield or attacks, create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token. Then you can pay a green, a red, a black, and 1, and sacrifice a sapperling to return Slimefoot and Squee and up to 1 other target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield at sorcery speed. Slimefoot and Squee enters and brings a sapperling, attacks, and gives a sapperling. Then, if it does die, we're able to return it and another creature by just sacking one of the sapperlings that were left behind and paying Jun +1. Sometimes we're going to want to sacrifice Slimefoot and Squee so that we can get some insane reanimation shenanigans going, and we're going to want to lean into that sapperling creature token strategy that we've got going as well. Along those lines, let's start off by looking at Golgari Germination, a green, a black, and 1 for an enchantment that says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token. That way, if our Slimefoot and Squee are on the battlefield and they die, Golgari Germination's there, it sees them die and creates that sapperling that we need to reanimate it and another target. It's just redundancy on this, but it's a point to look for permanents that are creating 1/1 sapperling creature tokens. There's a lot of instant sorcery stuff like this, one-off sapperling creature token creators that can be good in this deck, but we're going to want to primarily go with permanents just because we can get repeated extra value off of those as we go through. Night Soil is another good repeated value one, and instead of seeing creatures die and replacing them with sapperlings, it's going to let us target other graveyards, remove creature cards from those graveyards, and put a 1/1 green sapperling creature token onto the battlefield. This is a hose against any graveyard decks which are running rampant. We are one of them with this build. I am a builder who builds Reanimate, more on that later, but we're going to want to try and run a permanent like this that's going to hose other strategies and provide us value for our strategies. Speaking of sapperlings, the OG sapperling creator here, it's a little more fragile of a permanent, being a creature that'll create sapperlings, but it's just too good to pass up in this deck. It's got Ascend, which means if you've got 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing. It's just sort of a passive that you'll gain if you have 10 or more permanents on the battlefield at any point while this is there, or any other permanents that say Ascend on them. It says at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token, and sapperlings you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing. So it's not going to be hard in this deck to get 10 permanents on the battlefield. Make sure that triggers. It's going to grow all of our sapperlings, and each upkeep, check that, not just yours, each opponent's as well, we're getting an extra sapperling onto the battlefield. Next, I want to look at Palantir of Orthanc because this plays so well in our strategy for self-mill. We're going to want to get big creatures into the graveyard so that we can then resurrect them with Slimefoot and Squee or any of our other reanimation strategies. Palantir is going to help us do that. 3 mana for a legendary artifact that says, at the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on Palantir of Orthanc and scry 2. Then target opponent may have you draw a card. If that player doesn't, if they say no, you can't draw a card, you mill X cards where X is the number of influence counters on Palantir. You've put 1 at the beginning of your end step, and you'll put another at the beginning of any end steps or after that, and then player loses life equal to the total mana value of those cards. I have seen players misplay around this card so often. We're going to get to mill stuff. That's primarily what we want to do, but if they don't let us do that, we get to draw a card anyway. Scrying 2, that's just going to help us get to the right stuff in our deck. Palantir is a fantastic tool for self-mill, and you need to give it a look. This is a card I've been super impressed with, especially in graveyard decks. Another one is Collector's Vault. It doesn't just have to be self-mill, it can be discard as well. 2 mana for Collector's Vault. It's an artifact that says pay 2 and tap it, draw a card, then discard a card, create a treasure token. So you're going to get to go further into your deck. You're going to ramp your mana a little bit with that treasure token, and you're going to put your biggest threats into the graveyard so that we can then resurrect them for just 4 mana alongside Slimefoot and Squee. Just know that there are different ways to get stuff into your graveyard at your behest and not at your opponent's. Birthing Pod, I think, really has a home in here because we want to sacrifice our own commander. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but Slimefoot and Squee is a commander that is made to die and come back. Birthing Pod's going to help us do that. Pay 2 mana, either a Phyrexian and 1 or a green and 1, and tap it. Sacrifice a creature, our commander. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library at sorcery speed. This is fantastic. We get to convert our commander into a bigger creature, get our commander into the graveyard, and then we're able to pay 4, resurrect it and whatever big threat we dumped into the graveyard, all for just a little low mana investment of 6 mana. It's a lot of value here. Make sure you pack some sacrifice outlets. And look, if we're going to be running some big fatties, we want another way to get them into the graveyard, which is sneak attack. We get some value and then they go to the graveyard. It's an enchantment for 4 mana that says pay a red. You can put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. It gains haste, and you sack it at the beginning of the next end step. You get the ETB triggers of that creature. You get to attack. You get any of its attack triggers, and you get its death triggers. And then it's in the graveyard for Slimefoot and Squee to return. This is awesome in our deck. This does everything in our deck. It's so good. And look, now we get to the point where, okay, we've got this huge plan to cheat all these fantastically big creatures onto the battlefield. What do we want to do? Let's play some Jund fatties. You can play whatever big creatures you want in this deck. You can top this deck off with Fat Eldrazi and just slam them onto the battlefield alongside Slimefoot and Squee. But Ziatora, really Jund representative here, plays with our deck. At the beginning of your end step, you can sack a creature, and if you do, Ziatora deals damage equal to the creature's power to any target, and you create 3 treasure tokens to ramp your mana a little bit. You only need 1 more mana, and you've got another resurrection going with Slimefoot and Squee when we sacrificed it to Ziatora and shocked somebody. That's not if the power was grown. I'm pretty sure that I just really got excited about this deck as I was building it, and people are going to roll their eyes when I build yet another ReAnimator deck. Hey, look, though, David, thank you for the suggestion on this one. Thank you for the request. Slimefoot and Squee is one that I really need to take another look at. You know, we got to talk about the bling just a little bit, so I wanted to mention that Slimefoot and Squee has a very sweet alternate here in the stained glass, and being sponsored by Dragon Shield, I think this deck would go perfectly in the Might Shields, these dual matte, green dual matte. Look how dark green that is. These, I think, would be the exact perfect match for Slimefoot and Squee to completely pimp out your commander deck. When I asked the Patreon if they had any suggestions, Squatch came through and requested Wayta Trainer Prodigy. I had forgotten about this commander, and it came out at the end of 2023. It's a white, a green, and a red for a 1/5 human warrior with haste that says pay 3, a green and 2, tap it. Target creature you control fights another target creature. This ability costs 2 less to activate if it targets 2 creatures you control. Then it also says if a creature you control being dealt damage causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. There's a lot to unpack with Wayta Trainer Prodigy. We're going to have our creatures fighting each other potentially. We're going to have our creatures fighting our opponent's creatures potentially. And we're going to have triggers popping off out the wazoo. A human warrior with a dinosaur in the art, Wayta was pretty much clearly designed to be an Enrage commander. Enrage is a keyword that has appeared on creatures before. Says whenever Polyraptor is dealt damage, create a token that's a copy of Polyraptor. Enrage is going to have whenever X is dealt damage, whenever that creature is dealt damage, it gives you some effect. Goes and gets you a land, creates a token copy, deals damage to something else. There's a lot of damage reflection with sort of enrage abilities, look for the keyword. That's what I'm saying. You're going to want to run the enrage creatures in this commander at the very least, even though we can kind of play with how else we build it, just because you're going to get a lot of value off of this keyword in particular. There's also ways like Brash Taunter to take advantage of this. Brash Taunter is a 5-mana 1/1 goblin that's indestructible and says whenever Brash Taunter is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent. This is the perfect target to have fight your Polyraptor. Polyraptor is going to get a damage dealt to it, and it's going to create a token of it. Just happen to go crazy with those Polyraptor tokens. And then Brash Taunter is going to survive when Polyraptor deals its damage to it. Those are the kind of scenarios and value that we're looking for in this deck in particular. Rite of Passage is an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Remember that we are going to be doubling our effects that trigger whenever a creature you control is dealt damage. And so getting this doubled, getting any permanent that says whenever a creature you control is dealt damage doubled up, is just going to be to our benefit. Get your Pokemon onto the battlefield, have them start battling and training and gaining you value. This is another creature I just love because it can fight your commander. Hornet Nest, 1 green, 2 other, Insect 0/2 with Defender that says whenever Hornet Nest is dealt damage, create that many 1/1 green insect creature tokens with flying and death touch. Wayta only has 1 power, and for 1 green mana, 2 of your creatures can fight each other. So we can pay 1 green mana and create a 1/1 flying death touch insect creature if we've got Hornet Nest and Wayta on the battlefield. You see what we're trying to do with this deck? It's an interesting build. It's kind of narrow, but there's some ways we can play around with what we're going to be doing. We want some redundancy on this effect. By the way, with this much value that needs other cards to be synergizing with each other all in the same deck, we want to make sure that we can do our trick. Ulvenwald Tracker and other cards like this are going to provide that for you. Pay 2 mana, tap it, target creature you control fights another target creature. Doesn't have to be that you control, doesn't have to be that an opponent controls. You can just have a creature you control fight another creature straight up. Redundancy on our commander. We don't get the trigger doubling stuff, but at the very least we're able to do our tricks. Now, if we're going to have creatures in here that get enraged when they're dealt damage, if we're just getting targeted down, our tracker's gotten exiled, our Wayta is not even on the battlefield anymore after getting removed 2 or 3 times, we can get some interesting triggers with cards like Caltrops, 3-mana artifact that says whenever a creature attacks, Caltrops deals 1 damage to it. We can get those triggers to happen and still hit our creatures and get the extra value off of them. You can have a card like Boros Reckoner on the battlefield. They get dealt damage and then they fire that back. And if we've got Wayta on the battlefield, they're firing back double. It's just crazy how much stuff you can roll out in this deck. Speaking of those damage reflectors, let's get a couple of them on the battlefield and play Star of Extinction. 2 red, 5 other sorcery, destroy target land. Star of Extinction deals 20 damage to each creature and each player. That sounds like if we got a couple of Boros Reckoner type effects on the battlefield, we got Wayta out there, we cast Star of Extinction, we're doubling those triggers. When 20 damage hits Boros Reckoner, we're able to fire off 20 damage in whatever direction we want it to. This can get nutty super quick, and it's sort of representative of the type of board wipe you want to go for in here. When you're building a deck like this, just always keep your theme in mind so that you can make your picks alongside that. And look, you're playing a lot of creatures, they're taking a lot of damage, you're built to do a lot of damage to creatures on the board. Why don't we make everything indestructible? That should be game, right? If we have a bunch of creatures on the battlefield, we have Selfless Spirit out, we cast Beact, we sack Selfless Spirit, all of our other creatures are now indestructible. Beact deals damage to all of our creatures, some of which are reflecting all of it back at our opponents if we want them to. Yeah, that should win us the game. Squatch, thank you very much for this suggestion. It was fun to explore Wayta. I hadn't built this deck before, so I appreciate you. So to pimp out this deck, by the way, Wayta doesn't have an alternate, but does have a signed art card. So you could get this and like play it sideways on the battlefield and just sort of keep your commander over here so the rules text is still handy, and use that as like your command zone and use this as your commander. Regardless, if we're playing this deck, we definitely want to run lightning mat duels with the cards. I'm telling you, that hot yellow right there from the lightning mat dual sleeves are gonna look fantastic with your Wayta deck. Big thanks to our 2 patrons that helped me make this episode with their 3-color commander suggestions, but I'm going to round it out with one of my own, and that is Kroxa and Kunoros. A black, a white, a red, and 3 for an Elder Giant Dog. That's a 6/6 with Vigilance, Menace, and Lifelink. It says whenever Kroxa and Kunoros enters the battlefield or attacks, you may exile 5 cards from your graveyard, and when you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yes, it's a ReAnimator deck. No, I'm not actually going to put this one together in paper. I'm just passing it along to y'all because I think we've got a very mean deck opportunity here to just go full Hasbro and build greedy Mardu, Kroxa, and Kunoros, sprint as quickly as possible, reanimate huge threats, and just take our opponents completely by surprise. And look, when I say we want to fill our graveyard, we want to fill our graveyard. So we're going to peer into the abyss. 3 black, 4 other, sorcery. Target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in their library and loses half their life. Round up each time. Awesome. This is exactly what we want to be doing. I want to draw half my deck so that I can put my biggest and best threats into my graveyard at the end of turn when I have to discard, so that Kroxa and Kunoros are ready to reanimate them. When I say we want to fill the graveyard, we want to fill the graveyard. So we're going to play Mesmeric Orb for 2 mana. It's an artifact. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller mills a card. Yes. Our opponents are going no, and we are going yes. I see Mesmeric Orb in a deck like this, and it makes me go yes. When I say we want to fill our graveyard, we want to fill our graveyard. We can discard a bunch of cards with Peer. We can mill a bunch of cards with Mesmeric. We can mill a bunch of cards with Altar of Dementia. 2 mana artifact, sack a creature. Target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power from the top of their library into the graveyard. We can fill our graveyard up with Altar of Dementia. And if anybody tries to imprison our commander in the moon or anything like that, we can at instant speed sacrifice it to Altar and save it. I love when we get around Darksteel Mutation by, in response I sacrifice it. At least it's not going to just sit there and do nothing. We need to fill our graveyard. We're going to play Dark Deal because we're going to be prepared for it and our opponents are not. A black and 2 other for a sorcery that says each player discards all the cards in his or her hand, then draws that many cards -1. Beautiful. We're getting through our deck. We're pitching our threats into the graveyard to be reanimated later. If we're going with a major discard strategy like Peer into the Abyss, Waste Not, any number of wheels, really just run Wheel of Fortune if you're a rich person who can afford Wheel of Fortune, or if you've got Epson. Waste Not's going to play alongside those discard strategies. A 2 mana enchantment that says if an opponent discards a creature, you create a 2/2 creature. Whenever an opponent discards a land, you add 2 black mana to your mana pool, and if an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land, draw a card. Yeah, it's good value. Love this. We're going to be getting extra value off of filling up our graveyard to an insane degree. And look, if we're drawing a bunch of cards, if we're forcing our opponents to draw a bunch of cards by playing a wheel strategy, let's run old Bomi here. Orcish Bowmaster's 2 mana 1/1 flash. You know the rest. It's insane. This card is insane. It's too strong, especially against a wheel strategy, because everybody's going to be drawing cards outside of the one they draw in each of their draw steps. And Bowmasters is going to be shooting them for damage the whole time while creating a massive orc army. So that's how we're going to fill our graveyard up. That is the basic thought there. We need to ramp to our commander. We need to run the best mana rocks we possibly can. A lot of them. We're going mean here. We're trying to win the game. That's what we want to do with Kroxa and Kunoros. This pays for the 3 generic right out of the gate. This just helps with the tax if it gets answered. Rush to Kroxa and Kunoros. You'll get your 3 color pips some other way. I don't care if this is a 3 color commander. We're trying to rush to it. Dark Ritual. Boom. 3 black only, but it's helping get there. We're paying for one of the black pips. We're paying for any of the generic with this. We're trying to sprint to our commander. And look, we've been filling our graveyard up with creatures. Let's fill it up with the right creatures. We want some huge threats to get out there and be absolutely crazy in this Mardu Rush greed deck. But we need to get angry about it, okay? Because we need haste. It's a big CMC commander. We need to get it out quick, do as much ramping as we possibly can do, and we need it to be ready to go immediately. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, we get to do the thing. Anger's going to let it enter the battlefield and attack in the exact same turn while playing along with our strategy. We're ramping huge. Yeah, let's play a 7-mana sorcery that says put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control and wipe the board. That's what it says. That creature deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. Perfect. We got a bunch of huge threats in the graveyard. We're going to bring one back and it's going to wipe the board at the same time. And then we're going to pass. And hopefully we've got anger in our graveyard so we can attack and then pass. What a turn. It's fantastic. And did you see how the commander says enters the battlefield? Exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. And you get to do it twice for 1 white mana. You can respond to a removal with this. You can just blink it and get even greedier, you Hasbro lover. That's what you can do with Ephemerate. This will keep the commander safe. This will keep the commander returning things to the battlefield for you. And look, we need crazy Mardu reanimation targets, and I get how many good ones there are. But I'm going to show you one you're undervaluing, because I like to pick the card that is not the main obvious choice whenever I can. Piru the Volatile. I've had this card do absolute work. If you want to see Piru in action, it basically won me a game over on Kingdom's channel. I'll put the link to that game in the description. Me and Jake played a commander on their channel. Gotta check this one out though. It's a lot of mana. Don't even try counting that. It's too much to count. But it's a 7/7 with flying and lifelink, and we're going to try and reanimate it so we don't even care what the mana cost is. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, sack it unless you pay natural Mardu. And when it dies, it deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature with lifelink, y'all. It's got lifelink still when it does that. This can return you a ton of life. This is a huge flying threat in the colors. And if it gets answered, it's just going to wipe the board on its way out. And you get to reanimate stuff again, and our opponents really can't. To bling this one out, we've got a sweet variant from March of the Machine. You got to also pick up the Fury Mat Duels. I use these on my Dahada deck. They're like this reddish pink. Oh man, these Fury Mat Duels are so beautiful, and they're perfect with this one. Look, it's got like reddish pink in the art of this deck. There you go. That's my ReAnimator deck that I'm not going to build. I'm just passing it along so that some other greedy Hasbro lover can build it for themselves. Thanks again to the patrons that helped me make this episode. If you want to appear in an episode of this, or really any of our other episodes when we ask our patrons for help, go join our Patreon. It helps us directly do this as our full-time job. If you think you got any value from this on your way out, hit that subscribe button, maybe share it with a friend. That would be much appreciated. Otherwise, see you in the next one.